Welcome back to Rewind of the Living Dead. I'm Damon Martin.
And I'm Patrick Guerra.
Are you sure you're Patrick Guerra, or are you an android pretending to be Patrick Guerra? That's what I want to know.
Why would you say that, Damon?
It is officially 2023, and I just said that this film came out in 2022. Did you catch that?
No, I missed it.
Yeah, it comes out in 2023. It is now officially 2023. I'm not going to record that because it's still the new year, and I'm just now getting used to saying 2023.
We're shaking off the holidays, Damon. My God.
Yeah, this is officially our first episode of the new year. We, of course, released the lost episode of the New York Ripper, Quack Quack, last week. And this week is our official first episode of Rewind of the Living Dead in 2023, our fourth year?
God, we're going on our fourth year. This will be our fourth
year of doing this podcast. Oh my God. I can't believe it's been 4 years, almost 4 years now. We're going to talk about M3GAN. That's the newest film, the first big film of the year that just got released, of course, but we're also going to do a little bit of news and notes because there's so much that came out this week as we kicked off 2023 that felt almost irresponsible, not to mention a couple.
Got to address these things.
And of course, because we've done reaction videos in the past with trailers, but since we're doing a new episode, we figure out why we just throw it all in here. First off, one of the biggest trailers that released this week that I want to mention, of course, is Evil Dead Rise, the new film that comes out in April, the latest in the Evil Dead series. Now, we actually haven't reviewed any of the Evil Dead films on this podcast, and I know that sounds like a teaser because, yes, we're going to have to review an Evil Dead film somewhere along the lines with the new Evil Dead film coming out. That's kind of what we do, right? We do an old one, then we do the new one.
We
did that. We did a Scream, obviously last year when Scream 5 came out. We got Scream 6 coming out about a month before Evil Dead Rise. So we will get to an Evil Dead film on here. But here's my question before we get to Evil Dead Rise, Patrick. Were you a big Evil Dead guy?
I wouldn't say I was a big Evil Dead guy, but I watched them, and I watched Army of Darkness all the time. I watched the Evil Dead movies whenever they were around. They weren't like always playing on television like Army of Darkness was. So yeah, I was into the series, loosely. I wouldn't call myself a hardcore fan, but I did really fucking love the Fede Alvarez remake. And so when I found out, I wasn't even really paying attention, and I didn't even realize that they were doing another one, that they were kind of going to keep going in that world. And when the trailer hit, I was like, God damn, that's what I'm talking about. That new Evil Dead world that's out right now is so dark and nasty and like trying to be as scary as it can possibly be. And I love that. I love when a horror movie's going for the throat. And I feel like that's definitely what the Evil Dead series is doing with Evil Dead Rise.
So what I'm about to say is going to be sacrilege to a lot of horror fans, but I'm just going to say it. You've heard me say on this podcast since we started on day one, I said one of the probably my least favorite horror films are the ones that are ironically funny, right? Like
right.
Not the Zombie Lands and movies like that are meant to be horror comedies. The films that were so kind of goofy that they're funny.
So bad they're good.
Yeah,
right?
I just don't. And I never said it, but to me that was always Evil Dead. Like that was the model of Evil Dead. It was so goofy, it was funny, and also very gory and very horrific. Now, I will say this. I was never a huge Evil Dead or Army of Darkness fan, but I did grow to love Evil Dead 2, even though Evil Dead 2 is basically a remake of Evil Dead 1, just with better money and, a little bit more of a budget. But I did grow to love it. It had a great soundtrack, and I kind of grew to appreciate the kind of goofiness of that movie. And I love Bruce Campbell, even though I was not a huge Evil Dead guy growing up. And again, Army of Darkness has grown on me, but I'm with you on the Evil Dead remake by Fede Alvarez. Now, this one is also produced by Sam Raimi and Bruce Campbell. How it's going to tie in, or if it's just its own standalone thing, I don't know, the trailer. But here's what I like about it, and it's what you mentioned. Evil Dead, the remake, and now what Evil Dead Rise looks like. And again, maybe I'm wrong, but it feels like they've taken the comedy element. I won't say eliminated it, but it's very loosely in the background if it's there at all. Like it's not meant to be a goofy, funny, you know what I mean? This feels like a straight up horror movie to me. And I love that because that was kind of my biggest, I won't say my complaint, but my biggest itch when I couldn't quite get into the Evil Dead series was that, where it was so goofy, it was meant to be funny on top of being a horror.
Right.
And this one doesn't feel like that.
Yeah, no, like I said, it looks nasty, and I'm sitting in the actually getting ready for the to watch Megan in the theater, and I'm sitting next to this couple. They're a little older than I am, and the Evil Dead Rise trailer plays, and then when it's done, the guy goes, that's too scary for me. I'm not watching that." And I go, "My guy, do you know what you're here to see? Like, you're here to see a horror movie tonight, as far as I can tell." He was scared of the trailer. It was too scary for him and his wife. That's the shit I like to see, though. I want to see the because I think we're in sort of like a post Marvel era where we sort of everything has to be a little bit funny or it's like discounted for some reason. It's not a complaint about Marvel. It just seems to have rubbed off on everything that way. Like nothing cannot be a little bit funny because Marvel does that, and Marvel's the thing that makes all the money. Um, this doesn't look like they want you to laugh. It looks like they want you to piss your pants. And fucking sign me up, Damon. We were chasing that dragon, right? My number one movie of 2022 was Smile because Smile's nasty. Smile is trying to scare you. Smile is not happy. And there was a couple of actually really good laughs in Smile, but that movie's intends to scare you and make sure you're not comfortable with the lights off, and that's exactly what Evil Dead Rise looks like.
What I like most about the trailer and what I like about this era of horror moving into from 2022 into 2023 is I feel like we are moving into an era of unapologetically scary. And what I mean by
Yes.
that is horror films. We talked about this in our year-end show and our review show, the 22 best of 2022 episode. Is that horror became the other moneymaker in the theater besides Marvel? It was Marvel and horror. Smile did great. Barbarian did well. It was one of the buzziest films of the year. All these films that did really, really well. Terrifier 2, I'm wearing a Terrifier shirt right now, funny enough, um, blows up and becomes, this huge, unknown film, becomes like one of the most talked about movies of the year. There, the common thread of all those kind of films, even the studio films like Smile, is that they're unapologetically horror. They're not
Mm-hmm.
they're not bowing, they're not bending backwards to hide the gore or to hide the really uncomfortable scenes that some people may not want to see. A big part of the complaint about horror in the late 90s and early 2000s was the PG-13ification, if you
Mm-hmm.
will, of horror is they dumbed everything out and they wanted to make it to a broader audience. Well, the problem is horror, while it can appeal to a broader audience, horror is meant to be horrific. That's in the frickin' title of the word. You can't take that. And I'm not saying it has to all be a gore fest. I'm not saying every film has to be Terrifier 2 with gore, but you have to add in elements of scare. And being honest, like it's harder to make a real. I'm not saying it's impossible. I'm saying it's harder to make a really good effective scare if you're not willing to show the horrific parts of horror. And Evil Dead Rise looks like it's leaning into that. And films, and I love this era of horror we're into because filmmakers are not afraid to push the envelope and do what they want to do to make something scary. And that's what that Evil Dead Rise trailer reminded me of.
Now, with all that said, regarding PG-13 and funny, Megan's PG-13. We're going to talk about that in a moment. And then the other trailer, the other big trailer that broke just days ago, not even days ago, barely from the time of this recording, was the Renfield trailer. So Nicholas Holt and Nicolas Cage playing Dracula, and a very funny premise of sort of this idea that Renfield's in this long-term toxic relationship with Dracula, and he's absolutely fed up with it. But Dracula needs what Dracula needs. He's basically Nicolas Cage in Dracula form. You know what I mean? He's got his needs, and they need to be fulfilled. On the flip side, like something is so great and entertaining about that. And let's just be honest, like how great was the payoff at the end of the trailer when like they invite Nicolas Cage's Dracula through the door. And he's like, no, 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 don't invite Dracula in. He invites him in, and it's Nicolas Cage in all his glory and all that stuff. And man, I just went, I don't care if this movie's like not scary at all. I can't wait to see it. But it does look like it's actually going to be like kind of a gory, hardcore movie. If it's going to be funny, which it looks very much like it will be funny, it also looks like it's going to be a little bit hardcore too.
Yeah, I like, and again, this kind of goes to my point earlier talking about horror comedies. Like, I enjoy horror comedies when they're done well. Zombieland's one of the original Zombieland, not the god awful sequel. Zombieland is one of my favorite films of all. I love Zombieland. I could watch that movie 1,000 times. And one thing that was great about Zombieland is that it was a very funny, but also very hard. I mean, they showed people getting their heads blown off and stuff. It
Oh
wasn't
yeah.
it wasn't like an apologetically PG-13 horror film or a comedy film. They pushed the envelope in that film, and so that's what Renfield feels like to me. It was very funny, felt like that, and then the relationship. Nicholas Holt's a great actor. Also, Aquafina's in the film looked really funny, and then Nicolas Cage. Listen, I am all for the current phase of Nicolas Cage movies. Like, I know a lot of people love Mandy, but I absolutely adore Pig, which was his film from last year. You and I both loved that film.
My favorite film of 2019.
Incredible, incredible film. And a lot of, I mean, even though we did like Prisoners of Ghostland, which we kind of joke about, we did a review on the show, one of the most ridiculous films ever. But I love this. Even though it's weird, like this is Nicolas Cage's first studio film since 2011's Ghost Rider: Spirit of Vengeance. So more than a decade since he's done a studio film, and this is Universal, if I'm not mistaken. But it's great, and it's Nicolas Cage at his very best. It's Nicolas Cage in Con Air. It's Nicolas Cage in all these roles where he's a little over the top, but you can't help but love it. And the trailer looked great, and I'm way on board for this because again, it's being sold as a horror comedy, and I enjoy that because they're not trying to disguise what this film really is. It's ridiculous. It's gonna be funny, but it also feels like it's gonna be a little gory, a little out there, and I enjoyed that.
I hope we do get at least a one testicle reference somewhere in Renfield. That would be
I mean,
awesome.
I mean, it's anything is possible when you talk about Nicolas Cage and you talk about testicles. So
Testicle!
there you go.
That's the kind of commitment I'm looking for in Nicolas Cage for Renfield.
Yeah, but that is one I feel like we're gonna have to review that on the show because even though it's a comedy, I feel like we got to review that on the show because it is horror. It is based on the original. There's actually a lot of Dracula movies. There's also a movie coming out later this year called the last ride of the Demeter, which is a very specific
Oh yeah.
story from Bram Stoker's Dracula, and I believe it's Andre Overdahl who did Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark.
Oh yeah, he's good.
He's doing that, and it's a very self-contained story from the Dracula book that's being transformed into a movie. So we're kind of seeing a resurrection, if you will, of Dracula films this year.
So I'm not mad about that either.
Yeah. One other bit of news I want to mention before we get to our review of Megan.
M3GAN.
2 seconds is a new film got announced today through Deadline, a movie called Open House. Now, if you haven't heard this yet, it's okay. Open House, you may not, it wasn't, it wasn't blowing up necessarily until today because it just got announced today. But here's why we love it and why we can't wait to see it. It is from our good friends David Charbonnier and Justin Powell. If you remember them, they came on the show, spent an hour with us talking about their films, talking about their projects, talking about things they'd like to work on. And of course, they also directed a film you and I absolutely adored, The Boy Behind the Door, which was one of my top 5 films of 2020, I believe it was.
Hell of a film.
And they also did The Gin, which is a really, really well done film. Well, they are back with a new film called Open House, which is set around basically the premise of the film is essentially a woman selling like an open house and she gets trapped by a client. Am I selling that correctly?
That sounds about right. Yeah, a realtor trapped by a deranged client. Sounds like another contained thriller. Like I'm guessing he or she, we don't know, is gonna lock this realtor in the house, and probably terror will ensue. And we know very well that Justin and David do contained horror quite like no one else. I mean, The Gin takes place in a 2-bedroom apartment, and I was on the edge of my seat the entire time. And then, of course, Boy Behind the Door, big scary house, and I felt like I couldn't breathe. I mean, they know how to contain something and make it scary. I'm really hoping that we'll be able to get them on the podcast to talk about Open House, which I assume will probably come out sometime later this year, probably near the tail end of the year.
Yeah, and full disclosure, like, you and I have become friendly with Justin
Yeah.
and David, through having them on the show. So I'll be upfront about that. But we'll, when we review the movie, we'll be honest with our review. But we'll have them on the show, and I'm saying this sincerely, not even because I like them both personally, but I love their movies. I mean, Boy Behind the Door was so incredible, and I said this when we had them on the podcast, and I mean this. Like, I never imagined you could make a scary film in a 2-bedroom apartment. Like that was probably one of the most innovative original horror films I've ever seen, because it wouldn't even like it wouldn't occur to me that you could do that. Like, how do you make a horror film in such a small contained space like that, with basically two characters? It's a child and this genie, this djinn. Not to give a ton of spoilers here, but really it's basically two people in an apartment for the entire film, and it was terrifying. And it was so well done. And The Boy Behind the Door is one of the, and I'm not overstating the fact it's probably one of the most original, best done films of the past few years. Like, that's
Yeah,
how
it's
fun
really
that
good.
movie is. It's so well done. So I'm genuinely excited. Like, when you alerted me to it, because I hadn't seen it. I was off work today, and so I didn't see it. You alerted me to it. I was like, oh man, I went and read it immediately. I was like super jazzed, like way
Hmm.
excited, because there's certain filmmakers that when I see they have a new film coming out, much like, let's say, Quentin Tarantino, who's not in the horror genre. When I see Quentin Tarantino has a movie coming out, I just immediately mark it on the calendar. I'm going to see it. I'll be there opening night. Can't wait. That's how excited I am about this one.
Damn right, dude. I can't wait. I'm really, really hoping we'll be able to get them on there. I messaged them today and congratulated them on announcing it. It's hard to get a movie up and running, but they managed to do it, and I think they did it in a relatively quick amount of time because it's already shot. It's in the can. It's just a matter of now probably post production and the distribution of it.
Yeah, so very excited for Open House, and very excited for the filmmakers behind that. And yeah, we'll definitely try to get them back on the show to talk about that when the film comes out. With that being said, Patrick, let's get to our review this week. The first big horror film of 2023 to open up is M3GAN. Just opened in theaters. You and I saw this within the last day or so. Originally from a story from James Wan, of course, as I mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, with a script and a screenplay by Akela Cooper. And we've all, if you've seen the trailers, what I said in the opening is true. It's basically about a programmer slash scientist who builds an android, like a childlike android, to befriend her niece, who comes to live with her following a tragic accident. And so she kind of uses this robot that she'd already been building as a way to kind of build a bridge with her niece, but also, let's be honest, in this film, and this isn't a spoiler, I mean, you can tell this from the trailers, to kind of usurp some of her own responsibilities, because she doesn't know
Hmm.
how to be a parent. She's like a single woman living as a scientist in what we have to assume is like Palo Alto,
Hmm.
and she doesn't understand how to raise a 9-year-old child. And so this robot, this android named M3GAN, kind of steps in for her. It's not it's not when I say this, I don't mean this, it's not a totally original idea, because there's plenty of other films about androids gone wrong. Terminator is a great
Oh yeah.
example of that. But this is a different concept when you take it with a child, because children represent innocence, Patrick. They represent
Hmm.
innocence to us, and when you invade that with a killer robot, that's a pretty unique, interesting story.
And the great part about it is the opposite of that is child dolls equal shit my pants, like almost always. So when you see the trailer and you go, that's a creepy kid doll. Daddy's scared now. You know what I mean? like just that, like on that premise alone. And I a couple days before I was planning to go see it, I got a little weary because I realized it was PG-13, and we talked about that at the top of the podcast. I was like, oh shit, it's PG-13. Now it is produced by James Wan and Jason Blum and Akela Cooper's writing. They did some scary shit, so I'm assuming that it doesn't need to be a rated R movie for me to enjoy it. But I got to admit, it created a bit of skepticism in me. I'm happy to report that it didn't need to be rated R for me to enjoy it. It actually really, and I don't know if it came across to you at all, Damon. It really, to me, reminded me of an '80s horror premise, like almost like a chopping mall, like almost something, And it's like to the point where the setup was almost like slightly absurd, and I was like, I was starting to go, you know what, this is absolute bullshit, and I said, stop. This would be totally acceptable if this was 1987. If this plot had been set up for me in 1987, I would be all for it, because they were just making these weird little logical leaps. Thankfully, what they did, and this has happened very often on this show, we'll talk about a movie from the 80s or a movie from the late 70s or something that was cool, but probably needed a good reboot, like a solid modern retelling of that idea. That's what M3GAN feels like to me. It feels like a solid 80s premise that has been redone for modern times, except it wasn't. It's just a modern movie made by modern filmmakers and told in a really great and smart way. So even though there are some of these like weird logical leaps that it makes, it makes up for it in great commentary, great story, great characters, kind of really good pacing, and a really good creepy doll in M3GAN. I think I dare I say, Damon, do we have another icon on our hands? Is M3GAN going to be? We're going to see a lot of M3GAN costumes this year. I mean, I think there's no question about that.
Yeah, so let me backtrack to what you talked about the PG-13 thing, because this isn't a spoiler when I talk about this. We'll get into spoilers later, and we'll warn you when we're going to get into spoilers when we get into categories. But um, I will say that I didn't, much like you, I didn't realize it was PG-13 until right before I went and saw it. I can't remember how I found out, but I did see it, and I was like, that's weird. I
Mhm.
just thought it was R. I just assumed it was R. The film works in a lot of ways, regardless of the rating.
Mhm.
It's a solid story. It's well executed. It's well shot. It's well choreographed. It's well done all the way around, and it's genuinely creepy, and it's scary at moments. That being said, my issue with the PG-13 in this film is that there were moments, and again, no spoilers. There were moments in this film that I feel like could have been so much better had they been able to push it into that R rating a little further. Because obviously we know it's a killer robot. I'm not spoiling anything by saying the robot's going to kill people. It's a
Yeah,
killer robot story.
trailer makes that clear.
A lot of the cool moments in this film when the one trailer that's out there that everyone's seen, I think it was the first one that came out, where you see M3GAN talking to the boy and she says run, and then she gets down on all fours and like basically runs like an animal at him. It's
Yeah.
freaking creepy. um that and then a couple other moments where you're like, it really really well done, but my complaint, if you will, is that it could have gone further. And I'm not saying that I need to be here for a splatterfest. It doesn't need to be, an episode of Dexter where there's blood all over the walls. I'm not saying that, but a lot of this film feels like they edited out those parts just to make it PG-13, and I don't know why. Like I don't, and I'm assuming they're saying we wanted it to appeal to a broader audience, but I don't understand that based upon the success we see of horror over this last couple of years, to where people will go, if it's, they don't care that it's R rated, they just want a good film. And so that's my only real complaint about this film, is the PG-13 aspect. If they would have gone to a R, I'm not saying a hard R. It doesn't need to be like crazy. Like, again, I keep going back to Terrifier as like, one of the bloodiest films ever.
I don't even think there's a rating for what Terrifier is.
Yeah, but like it doesn't even need to go that far. I'm just saying, like, there are moments where they, in this film, they kind of cut and they make, again, they're using camera tricks and things like that to keep it safe so they don't get the R rating.
Mm-hmm.
I guess that's my question, but I just don't know why. Like I don't that's my only real complaint with this film, is that, like, I feel like a lot of these moments in this film could have been made just a little bit better if they would have pushed the envelope just a little bit further. Now, that being said, I still really enjoyed this movie. I still really enjoyed the story, the acting, again, the execution. It's not the most complicated plot in the world. An android turns on its but this is a tale as old as time. This James Cameron told us
Yeah.
this back in '84 with Terminator. You make these artificial intelligence robots, they're eventually going to get smarter than us, they're going to turn on us. That's not new, but the way they do it in this film is actually really well crafted and really well done. So again, that's all complimentary. But that's just my one issue. I don't know why it had to be PG-13, because I don't know that they're gonna get, like, I don't know if teenagers are not gonna go see this, or are they, it was dependent on them going to see this to make this movie better.
I'm totally guessing here. I've got no inside dirt other than I was about to read an article from Akela Cooper that did talk about an uncut version of this movie. They probably got into the editing booth, and some producer, and maybe it was Blum or Wan, looked at it and said, let's see a version where we just barely show enough. And because, and I think this is why, like it is one of our main characters who we haven't even talked about yet is Katie, played by Violet McGraw. Katie's 8 years old, 9 years old, somewhere in that space. So you're looking at, there might be kids who see a trailer for this. By the way, kids that are 8 and 9 years old are watching YouTube. Ask me how I know. They watch YouTube. They see ads all the time. They're seeing ads for M3GAN, for sure. And they see a little kid with a robot. Well, they get curious, right? Now, if you make a hard R movie, parents probably aren't going to take them to that. You make a PG-13 movie, you might take your 8, 9, or 10-year-old to a PG-13 movie and go, it's going to be kind of scary. And they'll be like, yeah, it's okay. I want to see M3GAN. I want to see this, this killer robot doll. They want to see it. And it opens up just that much more. Now, I think just based on what I saw and the audience reaction I was with, I think this movie's going to do great. I think it's going to overperform. I think the buzz should be good enough that it's going to have a pretty good run at the box office, and it's got to deal with Avatar, which is out right now and just eating up millions of dollars, much to the chagrin of any James Cameron hater, speaking of AI. But I think M3GAN's going to do pretty well for what it is, because it's entertaining. And they probably knew if they could just open it up a little bit to a few more younger kids, you could add that many more dollars. And it didn't, and you said it didn't really hurt this film. I wanted more blood and guts because I'm a psycho. That's what we do. That's our job. Our job is to be into that shit, right? But if what's true, and there is and I bet there is, knowing that it's James Wan and Jason Blum, there is a gory version of this movie. I bet it exists. And then guess what? All the hard copy people, all the physical media people, when M3GAN Uncut comes out, they're going to sell like gangbusters too. Now they're selling physical media on top of that. So I think it was a business strategy that will probably work out really well. And again, Damon, I think you and I both agree, it doesn't detract from how fun this movie is. This movie's a joyride.
It is, and my only disagreement there about the kids factor, I get what you're saying, but going back to a film we just talked about earlier from our friends David and Justin, The Boy Behind the Door has children in it. Now it's a much,
but it doesn't have a doll in it.
But it's a much different subject matter. But it has children. But that film is a hard R, and it's very disturbing. Now,
don't show that film to your 10-year-old, please.
Yeah, understanding it's a much different film. But M3GAN, I feel like again, that's where it lost me slightly. It was because there are moments in this film where they stopped doing what they were doing because they had to make it PG-13. And that always bugs me because there's a lot of moments, great moments in this film, where they edited it out. And when you say there's an uncut version, I get what you're saying, and I'll probably be right there in line and buy the Blu-ray or 4K when it comes out. I get it, and I understand that. But there are definitely moments in this film where they said cut when the moment went further. And that it bums me out because I know this could have been and again, to be clear, I'm complaining right now. So people are like, wow, you didn't I liked the movie. I really did. It didn't detract from my enjoyment, but it still left me wanting a bit more. Now, I
bet you there are scenes that are full blown. I don't think there was like they stopped. I bet there's a hardcore version of this movie. I'm almost cash money down.
No, that's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. But no, I'm not saying they stopped short. I'm saying they cut. Like they said, okay, hold on, we can't go that far. Cut that, and we're gonna make you. That's what bugs me. Like the version of this film where they showed everything that they shot or showed everything that they made. And somewhere, some executive, some studio person, maybe it was James Wan, I have no idea. Someone somewhere said, you know what, if we just cut that, and we just cut that, and we just edited that, this will be a PG-13 film. And that bugs me because I know that the R version probably exists, and I think it would have taken this film from being really good to great.
Maybe.
Because the story elements are strong, the performances are really, really well done, and the story, while it's not the most innovative new version of a story you've ever heard, a little girl goes to live with her aunt who didn't expect to be a parent. Her aunt just happens to be a scientist who builds robots for a living. There's a lot of satire in this film about kids growing up with like a virtual reality world where they're growing up with friends on iPads versus friends in real life. The little girl in this movie is a girl who was homeschooled by her parents, and you
Yep.
can tell she doesn't really have those social skills with other children. They actually mention that in this film. So there's again a bit of satire, a bit of social commentary in there. Not beating you over the head with it. I know some people are like, oh my god, not social commentary. It's not to the point where they're like bludgeoning you over the head with it, but there's a bit of that. So the film is strong in so many ways. So let me be clear about that. Like I said, this film, the film is strong in so many ways. It's just that, like, the difference between this film and, let's say, a film like Get Out, which they're totally different films. I use that reference because Get Out was a film that wasn't based upon kills or gore or,
Yeah.
those kind of big set pieces, right? But it was still terrifying based on the subject matter. So they didn't need that. They didn't need to show gore and kills because that's not that film. This was. M3GAN was a film built around kills and
It's a
built around
killer
killing
doll. Yeah.
robots. So again, it's just that one step they could have gone
Yeah.
for. Now again, I'm also complimenting this because all the elements I just mentioned are very good and very strong. And to be fair, to be honest, I walked out of the theater feeling pretty satisfied. That was my only real complaint. I'm just bringing it up because I wanna warn, because I would say 95% of the movies we review on here are R-rated movies, and we always have categories like best kill, best gore, and things like that. Be aware this is PG-13. That's my only warning. It's not like it's not a
Mhm.
don't go see this. I still really enjoyed this film. Again, that's just the one thing that kind of bugged me about this one.
Yeah, no, it for guys like us, right, people like us, because there's plenty of horror fans of all stripes. We want that nastiness, we want that gore, we want that maybe more sinister kill.
Yeah.
But I was also just having so much damn fun that it didn't take away from anything. I think, and I know you agree with me on that. Like
100%.
at the end of the day, it's still like a really fun movie. Like I said, it really, really reminded me of a plot and a premise I would have seen in the 1980s. It just in the 1980s, it would have been really bad. You would have laughed at a movie like M3GAN in the 1980s because they just didn't have that like perfect spark of a creativity in there and cleverness that this film does. This is a really clever movie that kind of works on a bunch of different levels. I think it'll work for different groups of people in different ways. All the way, it'll work for parents in a certain way. It'll work for women in a certain way. It'll work for engineers, tech engineers in a certain way. It'll work for horror fans in a whole different way. It'll work for people who have uncanny valley phobias in a completely different way. So this movie offers a lot, gives a lot, and now I'm sort of thinking about, well, am I gonna buy the M3GAN uncut? Probably, because I want to see what those kills look like.
Yeah, and I am a big fan of films about technology gone wrong. I mean, one of my all-time favorite films is The Terminator. I have the Terminator arm tattooed on me, so just to give you a heads up how much I love that. I love the Terminator.
Is it tattooed on your arm as your arm?
It is
Oh, there it is. Okay.
yeah, that's the Terminator arm. Um, so I love the Terminator, one of my all-time favorite films. Of course, T2 is also great, but I love the original Terminator. Of course, Alien and Aliens both introduced, artificial intelligence androids in those films. So
Yeah.
I'm a huge fan of Black Mirror, the show on Netflix. I love Black Mirror. A lot of those episodes have stuck with me for years. I really enjoy Black Mirror, so I love technology gone wrong as a premise. So I was kind of already a bit of the audience they were not trying to cater to with this film because I was already kind of like, I get it. And the way they did it in this film, there's an element of creepy and scary and kind of like a cautionary tale of what technology can do, but there's also like a really funny satire at the
Oh
center of
yeah.
this film where to give you again, this is a minor spoil, very minor spoiler. I'm saying spoiler because this is like I'm talking about the opening of the movie is a commercial for a kid's toy. The opening is that. The opening is a commercial for a kid's toy, and it's really funny. And
Yeah.
it feels 100% like something you would see on Saturday morning television. Without a doubt, it looks
Yeah.
like something you would see on there. And it is really funny. And the way it opens is so brilliant. And it really, I loved that because I didn't see that coming. When the film opens and it's boom, you're right in this commercial for a pet for children, basically a toy pet for children, which we all
Yeah,
have
I
seen.
think it's called Perpetual Pets.
Perpetual Pets. Yes, there you go. It's so funny, and the way they do it, and the commercial's so hilarious. You know, it reminded me of, like, you've seen. It doesn't go as far as this, but you've seen the commercials that they do on South Park, which they're like the funny, like the really goofy versions of, like,
Oh yeah.
the MTV commercial they do on South Park. It kind of reminded me of that, like, it's real, but it's also funny enough to, they're mocking you for these, like, commercials, and it was really well done. I really enjoyed that aspect.
You know what it really, really reminded me of was Paul Verhoeven's satire.
Oh yeah,
It was very reminiscent of RoboCop. It was very reminiscent of Starship Troopers, where they're really making like a hilarious satire on the state of things in the world today. Because we do know, and I know, I mean, as a parent, I'm trying constantly to rip the screens away from my kids. There's a like part of the opening scene of that is two parents arguing about their kids spending too much time on screens. I actually work in the tech sector, like on the side, doing video stuff for the tech sector. I sit in on their conferences all the time. The tech leaders don't let their kids like spend time on phones or screens at all, zero. The guys who make this, they don't, but they're selling it to you. They want you to have it really bad. They don't let their kids touch it. It's like handing your kids cigarettes for them, but they want your kids to have it. So they make these ridiculous commercials. And I thought to myself, well, I'm watching commercials like that. There's more than one commercial, and there's like promotions, and the CEO's doing like a promotion himself and saying ridiculous shit. I wish we had best line on this one, because I could have plucked like at least 5 best lines, but we don't have it for this. It was very Paul Verhoeven, where it was like, look at the world you're in right now, and look how ridiculous it is. Look what they're trying to sell you, and they're not even trying to hide how stupid it is. And I really appreciated that. That was that extra level, that extra thing that you could appreciate.
I'm upset right now because I went South Park and you went much better with Paul Verhoeven.
That's in my notes.
Rarely does a week go by that I don't say to somebody, "I'd buy that for $1." I love RoboCop, and I love Starship Troopers, one of my all-time favorite sci-fi films. I adore Starship Troopers.
Yeah.
Great pull. That you're absolutely right. It does feel very much like that, where there is that satire built in, the irony built into the commercials that are really funny, and just the underlying message of I think the underlying message of RoboCop and Starship Troopers, and to maybe a different extent M3GAN, be careful what you wish for.
Yes,
Be careful
100%.
what you wish for, because one of the elements of this film, and it's like I said, it probably won't get talked about a lot because this film is funny at moments. It's it's a well plotted, well crafted movie. One element of this movie to talk about is, like I mentioned earlier, about the little girl being homeschooled. Now, I'm not saying you shouldn't homeschool your children. I don't have kids, so I'm not telling you how to teach your children. So let me be clear about that. But
Damon's teaching your kids corner.
yeah, I could easily, that was another career path. Somebody's like, you should become a teacher. I was like, no, I shouldn't become a teacher because I have an English degree. Everyone's like, you should become a teacher. I'm like, no, I shouldn't.
No.
I have an English literature degree, and like, you can get your teaching certificate. I was like, no, the fuck I can't. Anyways, what they draw into this is the attachment that this girl has to M3GAN, the robot, and how it's almost like an unhealthy relationship. It's almost, when I was growing up, and this kind of puts us in our age bracket, Patrick, we remember when we had like imaginary friends as kid. We all had
that was the big
friends.
thing.
And we learned over time, and parents learned over time through psychology and everything, like that can be damaging, because you're not actually building relationships with real people. You're just dependent on this imaginary friend or your toys or whatever. You're not socializing. And so it's dangerous to a certain. So there's an element of that built in here, which is kind of terrifying in this movie. Like, it's kind of, I don't have kids, you do, so I can only imagine like how hard it hit for you.
Oh yeah, I came home and I was like, throw away all the goddamn iPads right now. M3GAN's gonna grow arms and legs and walk around like it should be iPad body running around our house trying to cut me in half. No, it's honestly, there is that cautionary tale portion of this. And it's funny, like I remember a show I liked, and I want to say you were into it too, Silicon Valley. You watched
Oh yeah, I
Silicon Valley
love
back in the day.
Silicon Valley. Yeah,
So
absolutely.
it just reminded me of something that Kumail Nanjiani tweeted something a long time ago when the show was still super popular. Is that they would go before every season, they'd go up to San Jose, where all the tech companies are, and they'd go around and learn about the new technologies, just to kind of get immersed in the world for a little while before they started the show. And sometimes they'd come across a piece of technology, and one of the guys would raise his hand. It could be Kumail, it could be any of the other guys, and they'd go, "Hey, didn't you think that like maybe people might abuse that and like use it for evil?" And the engineer would look at him sideways like, no, no, we didn't think about that at all. Anyway, so it works like, and it's just like they don't think about that. And so I thought that, and we haven't mentioned her name yet. It stars Allison Williams as Gemma, our chief engineer of the M3GAN doll. She's a very driven, very focused creator in her own right, work obsessed, and sort of, and that she gets an 8-year-old thrown in her lap. And believe me, I've met and known and worked with a lot of engineers. You probably don't want to give them an 8-year-old. They're not really built for that kind of stuff. And she plays that role really well. She's not thinking about the consequences of putting together a machine that will basically just keep a child busy so you can do things that are, and I quote, more really important to your life. Never mind, like raising a child, if you have one, is pretty important to your life. But this frees you up to do things that are really important. And I was like, geez, like if it didn't hit so close to home for somebody like me who has actually worked in the sector, I would think it was pure parody, like not even satire. Just like, okay, well, that's not a thing that happens. It's a fucking thing that happens. It's a real thing that happens. So that cautionary tale aspect of M3GAN, I really appreciate on that whole other level. There's tons of philosophical discussions about letting technology raise your children. That's an aspect in here that I think is explored rather brilliantly. I think it's one of the more sophisticated ideas that is laid out, the more sophisticated themes in the whole movie. I love and appreciate that, because this movie can be a lot of fun. It can be creepy. It can be exciting. It can be an action movie. It can just make you go, holy shit, that's weird. But it also has that underlying smartness to it, which I really appreciate. I know you're a story guy. I'm a story guy. You like a good story. Sometimes it can make or break a movie. This one had it. This one had a great story. Something that kept me on the hook from the beginning to the end.
Yeah, and like I said, I love stories built around technology because I'm with you with that. I'm 100%. Like I said, I mean, in a way, I was raised on that. I was raised in the television era.
Yeah, I was raised on
My parents,
MTV.
my parents would sit me down in front of the TV when they wanted to occupy my time, and they didn't want to deal with me for a little while. They just plopped me in front of the TV, turn on a channel I liked. I used to wake up every Saturday morning before my parents. I would get up, I'd go fix myself a big bowl of cereal, and I'd sit down in front of the TV and watch cartoons for like 4 hours.
Yeah.
That's what I was conditioned to do. That was the M3GAN of our era, was sitting down in front of a television. And we were probably everyone that grew up in the 80s and 90s lived a similar lifestyle. And now it's iPads, it's phones. But yeah, I mean, it's a real thing. And this film takes it to that next level. And again, I know, I mentioned Black Mirror earlier. Black Mirror is very much about that. Like, be careful what you wish for technology. Like, you'll get it, but then, remember the consequences of what comes along with this. Every time I see one of those videos pop up on YouTube or TikTok or Twitter or whatever, where it shows like the robots that are like opening doors and climbing buildings, and like everyone's like, we're like one step away from Terminator. I'm like, we're really not that far away. And like people just, and what, to your point, what you said earlier, the engineers like, why would it be bad that a robot can pull out a gun and shoot, 3,000 rounds a second? Why would that be bad? I don't understand. How could that go wrong?
What's wrong with a robot that feeds off dead bodies for energy? Was that a problem?
Yeah,
That's recycling.
There was a robot that did that. Did you see
Yes, there was.
Feeds on organic matter, and no one rang the alarm on that one until everyone's like, do we think maybe it's a bad idea that the robot that feeds on human flesh is a bad idea? I don't know. But yeah, like we are so oblivious to that, and this film does a great job of putting it in a satirical way that is also relevant yet funny and also scary and creepy. And again, That's the real strength of this movie to me.
No, absolutely. I couldn't agree more.
All right. With that being said, let's get into categories, which means we are now going to get into spoilers. So if you haven't seen M3GAN yet, go check it out. It's in theaters now. I think if you can tell from the first half of this show, Patrick and I both really enjoyed it, so go watch it. Or again, if you just don't care about spoilers, we are now going to get into that. And Patrick, let's kick things off as we do each and every week on the show and talk about best performance, because ultimately this is kind of a small cast, which I enjoy. I actually really like casts that are kind of small like this. Even though it's by no means does it feel like a low budget movie. It's obviously a big budget
No,
movie. It's a
yeah,
Universal film, but a relatively small major cast in this film. So for you, who was the best performance in M3GAN?
my best performance went to Amy Donald slash Jenna Davis as M3GAN. Yes, M3GAN was played by an actual, I think, 8 or 9 year old or 10-year-old named Amy Donald. So when you see that in the trailer, somebody, this robot kind of dancing around, that's a child. It's actually a child in the M3GAN outfit with a wig on and a silicone face over. And then voiced by, I believe she's about 18 years old, this woman named Jenna Davis. I was just enthralled by this robot. And credit to Akela Cooper's great writing. And it felt very like, I think you probably, because I know you really loved Malignant. There are shades of Malignant in this. It's almost like Malignant 2.0 in its own weird way.
100%.
And so I could feel the cleverness of Akila's writing behind the dialogue in M3GAN and the interactions that she had. And let's face it, Damon. Yes, we had Allison Williams in the movie, but the star of the show was M3GAN, and I had to give it to her. I thought it was a fantastic performance.
Yeah, I think that also Allison Williams, I mentioned Get Out. She was also in Get Out,
Yeah.
so that's probably one of her most famous roles. Yeah, I think that's what, again, the strength of a lot of this is built around the robot itself, and because it's like a human-like robot, you do have to have like a really like measured performance from whoever is behind that mask, so to speak. Because again, there's a version of this where it's really badly done, where it's overly robotic or it's overly human.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like where you don't know that it's like not a robot. The way they do it in this film is it's really well orchestrated, to where it's a perfect mix. You don't lose sight. It again, not to keep bringing up the Terminator, but it's like watching the original Terminator and the mannerisms and the movements and the way that the Terminator talks. Like you can tell something's off. Like you may not tell that it's a robot under human
Right.
skin, but you can tell something's off. That's kind of what M3GAN does, where it's human enough to where it's creepy, but it's also robotic enough to where you're like, something's not right here. And that's
Mm-hmm.
what this performance does for me, and I really enjoyed that as well.
Oh yeah. I mean, listen, I'm really curious to see how a sequel pans out because I think people are going to fall in love. If you haven't seen the movie yet, I think you're going to fall in love with M3GAN in a really weird way. Like at one point, she gets oddly heroic because she's dealing with Katie. She's basically thrust in front of Katie, who has just lost her parents, and Allison Williams Gemma just does not have time for a kid right now. She is trying to make this big project happen at work. So she uses her cool AI robot to spend time with this kid. And at one point in front of all the executives, the kid is crying, and it looks like Gemma's about to fall flat on her face because the kid is not like not being happy in the moment. Well, M3GAN comes in and saves the day and talks to her in a genuine, warm, and nice and good way about loss and how to cope with it and how to deal with it. And it's super smart and like a way that you would want to tell even a grown adult, like, here's how you should handle loss. And it makes Katie feel better. And all the executives are like cheering and crying and they're happy because M3GAN is so great. On the flip side, M3GAN also kills a dog. I mean, she's vicious and she can be caring. And truth be told, her whole kind of like mission and her whole marching order is to protect Katie at all costs, and it starts to escalate in an insane way, and that's how you get the plot of M3GAN. But you get it through this great double performance from Amy Donald and Jenna Davis.
Yeah, you talk about the cautionary tale part of it, where the scientists don't realize what they do when they embedded M3GAN with the protect order. You protect her,
Yeah.
from emotional and physical harm. They don't realize like you can't just give something like that a blanket statement, and
Yeah.
that's like putting an armed guard at your front door and saying don't let anyone in. Well, you didn't mean to like not let anyone in. Shoot them dead when they come to your door. That's not really the order you're supposed to give.
Yeah.
And
AI is very literal.
that's kind of where the technology, the literal marching order for M3GAN is protect Katie at all costs, and she does violently. Uh,
Violently.
yeah. So for me, that was a great performance. But for me, I'm actually going to go on the other side of this because you and I, and we've been very honest. You and I, almost in a way, we don't feel bad, but we're very honest when we see films with child actors. We're honest enough to say that a child actor. Listen, we understand it's kind of, we feel bad when it's a 9 or 10 year old, and we're like, yeah, they were not good. Because again, they're not, But the reality is, listen, they're in a movie. You got to be good, and child actors can make or break this. Again, going back to our friends who did Boy Behind the Door, we praised them because those performances were really strong. And again, there's a version of that movie where you don't get good child actors, and it's really bad. So my best performance goes to Violet McGraw as Katie. 9-year-old girl, and she absolutely kills it in this movie. She is so like, I mean, her mannerisms as a child of dealing with grief, the loss of her parents, and then re-blossoming in a way when she meets M3GAN, and then the way she becomes withdrawn from the rest of the world because M3GAN's her entire world at that point. Like, she doesn't really have time or the capacity to care about even her aunt or anyone else around them because M3GAN kind of becomes her whole world. It's so well done. And Violet McGraw, for people who are like, where do I know her from? She was in the first season of The Haunting of Hill House. She was the little girl in The Haunting of Hill House. She was great in that show too, by the way. But she just does a really, really good job. And like, this is one of those roles at the end of the year where I'm like, she deserves award nominations. Like, she's so good in this role and she sells it so well.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't go as far as awards, but actually, truth be told, she was my number two pick. It was between her and the girls who play M3GAN. It is a kind of a gut wrenching performance at times because this is a kid who's going through serious loss. The movie kind of skirts around it sometimes. I think just for the sake of kind of having to be a horror movie rather than being a proper drama. But that's no fault of her acting. And when she needs to turn it on, she turns it on. And when she needs to be a kid, she feels like a kid. And I think that's super important. And that's what we've talked about in the past is that authenticity. It's like, I don't want a kid actor who thinks they are Anthony Hopkins.
Yeah.
I want a kid actor who it just is a kid and behaves the way a kid would behave. That's exactly what she does in this movie. And I think that's why that performance works so well.
Yeah, it's a really strong one. Let's talk about best scare in M3GAN because this film is, of course, is a horror film. So what was your best scare in M3GAN?
Well, you noticed a couple of times, Damon. This movie is actually, I wouldn't say light on scares, but I'd say there's like very specific punctuated like scares. This is the intent. We intend to scare you in this moment. But right off the top, there were 2 dog scares, like dog jumping up to bark at somebody's window, and another one like a dog's attacking. So I was like, is that going to be what we're having? Well, my best scare went for M3GAN attacking the dog because the dog attacked first, or not attacked, but kind of jumped up and scared Katie, and then later on it attacks M3GAN, and then turns around and M3GAN attacks back, and I just wasn't ready for M3GAN to attack like a dog herself, and she went after that dog, and that didn't make me like jump out of my seat, but I was like, oh, okay, I'm caught off guard by this.
That was probably my least favorite part of the movie, not because it wasn't scary, but because when you harm animals, when you harm as a dog owner, I was like, nope, bridge too far.
But it's important to do that to make sure you don't fall in love with M3GAN because you easily could.
Well, yeah, there's another scene I'll talk about in a second, my favorite scare, where I was kind of like rooting for M3GAN in a way. So you're absolutely right. Like, that's the scene. But yeah, I'll be honest, the one that got me the best, the jump scare, was when the dog jumped up on the window. I jumped out. I was like, holy shit. It definitely got me. That was one of the ones where it got me. And there's a couple of moments like that. But yeah, that was a good one. And that was the one, like, again, because there are moments in this film where you're kind of like, rooting for M3GAN, and so that's one where you kind of go in the other direction where I was like, fuck this robot.
I think it was important to kind of put that out front to go, you actually do want to think in your mind, fuck this robot.
Yeah.
because everything we're going to show you from here on out is going to lull you into a sense of like actually kind of rooting for her. So don't forget that she's vicious enough to kill a dog. That's the best way. Not the best way, I should say, but it's an easy way to make an enemy in your film is have them mistreat an animal. Then immediately the audience is like, well, fuck that guy, fuck that girl. They're mistreating an animal. There's no way I'm going to like them the rest of this movie. And that's a smart thing to do here because there are moments where you are going to be lulled into a sense of security with M3GAN around.
So my best scare kind of plays into that a little bit about the rooting for M3GAN moment, but I also want to use this as a mention of we've complained about this on the show before, Patrick. Trailers really need to stop giving away the best parts of movies in trailers because it really drives me insane. Because my favorite scare in this film, at one point, Gemma, played by Allison Williams, decides it's time for her niece to go to school, and her niece had gone to homeschool before. Well, she's a single person working at a robotics company or a toy company actually called Funky, which I thought, or was it Funky or something?
I think it was something like that. Funky,
Yeah, Funky, obviously play on Funko, which is kind of funny. But like, she's working. She can't stay at home and teach her child, so she has to put her in. She puts her into like a weird alternative school where they learn outdoors and they're going on like a chestnut hunt or something. And Katie gets paired with like a kid who looks like one of those kids who plays the Little League World Series where he's actually like 23, but he's pretending to be a 12-year-old.
Yeah.
He's way older and way bigger than the rest of the kids. And he's a bully. I mean, that's ultimately what he is. He's a bully, and so he gets paired immediately as soon as they get out in the woods. This kid starts bullying Katie. Well, M3GAN ain't playing that shit, and so the scene that they put in the trailer is you see a little bit of the scene where M3GAN tells the boy run, and she goes after him, and that's where you see that crazy like spider like almost crawl like sprinting through the woods.
Yeah.
It's longer in the film, which is why it's my best scare because it's longer and more involved and kind of disturbing because the little boy tries to like play with M3GAN and you're like, where is this going? It's getting a little dark right now because he's like slapping the doll and like you're like, what? This is getting pretty creepy and weird. And then the doll, comes back to life and is like, oh, do you want to play? And anyways, so when you see that turn in the doll's animated face where she goes run and then she starts coming after this boy full bore and he's running through the woods, it's actually a really effective moment. Again, my only complaint is I wish they hadn't put any of it in the trailer, and I understand why you tease that in the trailer. I get it, but like that was like a genuinely like well done scary it reminded me of a little bit as do you remember the movie Fear, the Mark Wahlberg
Yeah.
there's a moment where Mark Wahlberg finally gets exposed as like the psychopath, and she goes after this guy friend of Reese Witherspoon's, and he tells him his story of being grown up in abusive homes or whatever. And then at one point, the boy runs to the woods, and Mark Wahlberg, Marky Mark, is just chasing him, sprinting through the woods, and it's an intense couple of moments. You're like, oh shit. And that's kind of what this reminded me of. Is like just this, it's an intense moment or two of like this boy running for his life and this creepy ass robot like trotting through the woods on all fours coming after him. It was an effective scare.
It's definitely one of those oh shit moments, and it is freaky seeing M3GAN crawl around like that, like some sort of sprinting spider. Yeah, I wish they hadn't shown it in the trailer. I know why they did. That would have been a really creepy reveal in the movie.
Yeah. So with that being said, let's talk about best kill, because there are kills in this movie. Now I'll be honest, it's not over the top. I again probably could have used a few more for my sick, twisted horror mind. But what was your best kill in M3GAN?
My best kill, now, for all the other parents listening, brace yourself. It is when M3GAN sort of kills Brandon. Brandon is the bully that Damon is just talking about. If you're a parent, you don't want your kid being bullied. And they set up Brandon really well to be just a villainous little shit. And you just don't like him, and they give you no reasons to like him. No reasons at all for him to be sympathetic. And he's downright abusing not only Katie, but M3GAN too. And you're not necessarily like in M3GAN's camp at this point, but you're watching him kind of like fuck with this doll, and you're like, what a fucking sight. Look, a little Patrick Bateman here. Like, what the fuck is wrong with this kid? And of course, M3GAN decides to teach him a lesson. And I wrote in my notes, M3GAN teaches Brandon a lesson, and no one seems to be too upset about it.
That was
because
that was the moment I talked about where I was rooting. I was kind of like, I'm not rooting for a child to die. Let me be clear about that. But when he runs in front of a truck and gets hit, and like Megan's coming after him for bullying the little girl, I was kind of like, you know what? Fuck this kid. So like in that moment, I was kind of like rooting for Megan. I was like, that's what I'm talking about. Where I was like, all right, you know what, Megan, you're kind of justified in going after Brandon. So um,
it was a good job by everybody involved in that situation, because you do sort of, you go, yeah, I'm not too upset about Megan killing that one.
yeah, I'm not really against
I'm not
that.
like I'm not really bothered by that.
So my best kill was probably the one that pushed the envelope the most, and the one that I was like, man, I just wish I'd been able to see a little bit more, was when Megan goes after the next door neighbor.
Mm-hmm.
And the next door neighbor is this really annoying woman who doesn't take care of her. She doesn't. It says that she doesn't take care of her dog. She doesn't discipline her dog because the dog always keeps running across into Jim's lawn and pooping in the lawn and jumping up on the window and scaring Katie, and the woman just does nothing
The
about it.
dog's kind of aggressive.
Yeah, aggressive dog and the woman. So when the dog goes missing after Megan deals with the dog, the woman becomes convinced that Jim did something to the dog. And so she calls the cops and all these kind of things. So at one point, Megan finally just decides to dispatch this woman on her own. And it's a really well done, creepy scene because she makes noises like the dog.
Mm-hmm.
And so she lures this woman into like a woodshed. And then she comes after her with a freaking nail gun, nails her to the floor, which is probably one of the only kind of gory scenes. And that's not really gory, but it's it's an effective, nail through the hand kind of moment. And then creatively, kudos, because she uses a power washer to basically blow this woman's face off. And that's where I'm talking about. They could have, because we actually could have seen this woman's face get obliterated by a power washer. It would have been pretty cool. They stopped short of that because it is PG-13. But still, creatively, I was like, damn, that was kind of cool. Like, use a power washer to literally rip this woman's skin off her face.
I'm definitely looking forward to the uncut version of that, because I have not seen a power washer kill before, and I really want to see how that one played out.
Yeah, it reminded me, I'm always, again, as a horror fan, I'm always in the mood for creative kills. It reminded me of using a bread slicer in Fear Street, back in one of my
that was
my favorite film of 2021, the bread slicer kill. And I was like, that's a creative, cool way to use that. Mm-hmm. Power washer. We know it's ejecting water at like unbelievable. I mean, you're not supposed to stand in front of a power washer. Imagine
it could cut your fingers off.
Yeah, imagine getting one directly in your freaking face. I mean, I was like, damn, that was pretty brutal. So that was my favorite kill.
Yeah. I'm looking forward to seeing the full breadth of that scene.
Yeah. So I guess one thing we want to talk about here when we get into categories is talking about artificial intelligence, because Patrick, we are in a day and age where artificial intelligence is real. It's no longer a theoretical thing. I mean, it's in our everyday lives in a lot of ways. So I'm curious, what artificial intelligence, whether it's out there and you can't afford it, or you're thinking about it and you're like, that would be a good idea. What artificial intelligence would you like in your life, and what could the potential risks of that artificial intelligence be? So, play engineer, but this time you're actually going to come up with like why it's a bad idea.
Well, I tell you what I need for sure. What I need with a family of 4 and kids who just want to eat fucking gummy bears all day, I need an AI chef. I need a chef that can learn what we like, how to make it healthy, and how to cook it safely. Now, I don't need to tell you the AI horror potential for something that uses your kitchen knives, your fire, your boiling oil. There is a M3GAN sequel in there. There's like a M3GAN spinoff for sure, where a chef, an AI chef, runs amok because, let's be honest, fire, sharp things, salmonella poisoned meat. There are plenty of potential horror situations to go. But damn it, Damon, I still need that AI. I'm still gonna buy it.
Yeah, 100%. Well, so to my point, mine actually takes yours a slight step further. There was a show, I believe it was an AMC show here in America, but I believe it was a BBC show over in England, I think, or Channel 4. It was a show called Humans. It actually had a great cast. It had Jim Chan in it. Really, really.
Hmm.
I don't know if you ever heard of this.
I heard of it. Yeah, I
Yeah,
haven't
it's
seen it.
basically. It also had William Hurt in it before his passing. It was a really, really good show about basically android robots that were created to serve humanity, which is how it always starts. But these were set up for very specific reasons. So, like, one of them was, again, there's versions who were basically like sex workers, where you
Hmm.
could buy a doll and it would basically be, and it was very human, very lifelike. My point is, I know this sounds really generic, but in all honesty, as busy as I am, the kind of AI or kind of synthetic android that I would need is the android who would do the menial tasks that I don't have time to do. So I'm talking about food shopping. I'm talking about doing dishes. I'm talking about taking out the trash. I know that sounds so generic. But as a guy who works, 60, 70 hours a week in my job as a journalist and I'm on in front of the computer, there's little things that I just don't have time to do, or when I have a rare day off that I'm like, oh man, do I really, God, I have to do that. I do laundry on my day off. Like I have one day off and I do laundry. I know that sounds so generic and people are like, bitch more about something that's really not that bad. But these little menial tasks that like I have to do and I don't like based on my job, I don't really have a lot of time, so I have to make time to do them. And then I lose time to just do something like, oh, I don't know, meditate or just relax and watch a freaking movie. I don't have those kind of times. So like that would be my ideal situation. And that show Humans was set up like that. Now it goes completely haywire and goes completely wrong as all these situations do. Imagine, you give a robot control over your house and then suddenly it becomes their house. You're no longer the overlord. They're suddenly like when you don't pick up a plate and they're like, Damon, you didn't put away your plate. I'm like, I'll put it away later, and then a knife goes through my neck. I told you to put that fucking plate away, Damon. That's my fear. Is like I would be like, oh yeah, you can run the house, and then that's my blanket order, and then next thing you know, I'm waking up with chains around my ankles and hands, and they're like, get up, bitch. You're up in the morning. I'm like, oh my god, I gave the robot the run of the house.
Damon, we're not watching Shudder tonight. I want to watch Real Housewives of New York City. No,
Yeah.
please help.
Yeah, that's again, that's the blanket order of like run the house, and yeah, then that's the end of me. So yeah, that's what I would do. I know it's very generic, but in all honesty, that's what I could use the most, and it would also be the one that would 100% go wrong really badly.
I used to have a podcast with Spilled Bag of Ice, as some people might know him from Twitter, and we actually used to have an AI producer for our podcast.
Really?
And because the podcast premise was we'd get a prompt at the beginning, and then we had to spin it into a story within an hour. So we actually had a story that was like workable into a script by the end of the podcast. And we had what we called the AI producer. We just found some random like a premise prompt on like online, and you type in random words and it would put a prompt up for you. So I have actually used an AI to assist me in parts of my life before.
Yeah. So it's
I
kind
mean,
of
I guess we're doing it every day. I'm sure there's tons of AI intelligence in my phone.
100%, 100%. So with that being said, we also talked about this being the latest, AI movie, and there's lots of them out there. And I didn't realize until I started doing the research how many artificial intelligence films and TV shows I've enjoyed like over the years. Now I mentioned Terminator at the start. Terminator's kind of one of the most iconic versions. But I mentioned Alien and Aliens when you talk about the
Yeah,
android, the
great
sentient
call.
person. Lance Henriksen, of course, a great person. Of course, the original Alien was a terrifying moment when what's his name?
Ash is
Ash.
revealed.
When
Yeah,
Ash
great
is revealed
scene.
and goes after Ripley, and it's freaking terrifying in that moment. One of the scariest moments in that movie. It has nothing to do with the alien itself. It's when Ash
Hmm.
flips and goes after Ripley. That's good. You mentioned RoboCop. We mentioned Starship Troopers. There's those versions, but also again, I mentioned Black Mirror. There's so many good versions of that in Black Mirror. And I know that's a TV show and not a movie, but like Black Mirror has so many good scary, like one of my favorites is one that they've talked about. It came out in the first season called The Entire History of You, which is, I don't know, have you watched Black Mirror?
I've seen a lot of it, but I've not seen every episode.
The Entire History of You comes up with the premise of basically like these implants that you put in your eyes, almost like contacts, and it watches and records everything
Oh, I did see that
in
one.
your life. And this guy finds out, through the app or whatever, that his wife has been cheating on him. And
Yeah.
it's because people are, again, done with the best of intentions. Like, you use it, you have a parent or a grandparent going through Alzheimer's, and you can go back and relive their lives and help you remember things. And like, the concept is better than the reality, right? Like, the concept, like, oh, it's gonna record everything you see. Great. What about the things that you don't want it to remember and see? Well, it's got everything. So that's one, and there's a lot of those. So Black Mirror's one where it's like everything in Black Mirror is a cautionary tale of technology. But that's
hmm
another. So I kind of forgot like how many great AI inspired shows and movies I like.
Oh, we do. There's so many. I mean, shit. And they've been going on for a long time. Let's not forget 1964, 2001 A Space Odyssey, right?
Um,
I mean, that's about, AI run amok. Blade Runner, there's another one where kind of AI runs amok. But there was one in particular. And of course, I immediately thought about Terminator, and especially Terminator 2. Because I think in the original Terminator is awesome. Like, I love that movie, and I think it's great. But in Terminator 2, the idea that the AI could become a friend and protector was something that was different, and they actually developed a bond, right? The Terminator and the kid develop a bond. So there's that. But then I thought of a movie that didn't quite work for me. That was widely beloved, and if I remember correctly, I think you love this movie too. Ex Machina.
oh yeah.
Ex Machina is widely praised as a great movie about the dangers of AI. I found it to be very basic. I found the subject matter to be kind of like typical, and I felt like it went down a very typical path where it was sort of trying to be interesting, and then it just went down the Terminator path. Basically, at one point, it just turns into the Terminator. What I loved about watching M3GAN was I realized, like, while that was just basically the male gaze and the idea of like, hey, let's just make a hot AI and see what happens. That's kind of what Ex Machina is a little bit, if I'm being super reductive about it. M3GAN takes like real needs, real issues, things that are relevant to everybody, and goes, here's why AI can't fix it. Here's why you need to be wary of AI as a supplement and not a replacement for what the human psyche needs. I thought M3GAN was so much more clever than something like Ex Machina. Not that I think Ex Machina sucks. I just didn't like that basically it just boiled down to robot trying to kill people. Even in for M3GAN, there's a reason. Eventually she just kind of takes over, but the objective pretty much remains even all the way to the end, even when she's trying to destroy even the closest people to Katie. It's still for the intent of like protecting her and being her one and only caregiver. There's still objective to it. So I felt like M3GAN was almost a refined version of something like Ex Machina.
I'll disagree. I do like Ex Machina. I really do like that movie. But I think also it's kind of like like when you think about when Ex Machina was made and relative to its time of being the next stage of the killer robot phenomenon, right? Like it is the next step up of like a really like when you find out, spoiler, sorry for spoiler, like when you find out that like you have your entire focus on this movie of it being about this one robot android, and then you find out there's another robot
Mm-hmm.
android that you didn't know, and it's so like the humanity of the robots, yet they're still robots was kind of the point of that movie, and I didn't lose track of that, but I also remember that it's a movie that was made a decade ago, and it was a little bit more of like the just straight up terror of a human like robot that you don't know is a robot, if that makes sense. It's not
Mm-hmm.
like the Terminator, which introduced you right away where it's a robot. Where I agree with you on M3GAN though is it feels like in a lot of the Black Mirror episodes, it feels like the next evolution of that, where it takes the kind of like Humans. I mentioned that TV show Humans, where it takes the next step of that. Where Humans does is it kind of takes a bit of the concept of artificial intelligence developing to a point where the machines or the robots develop real feelings,
Right.
Like they're no longer just mindless, faceless creatures. Like they actually develop emotion, almost like Star Trek. If you remember what Star Trek, when Mr. Data, the android in that show, develops his entire purpose for throughout so much of that show is developing. It's the one thing that he doesn't have in that show is he doesn't have emotion. He can't feel what humans feel. So everything's analytical to him. And so that's what humans does. It's the next stage of that. So that's where I kind of defend Ex Machina because what I get what they're trying to do, and also get it was a different time when that film was made. It was a decade ago. I think we've gotten more sophisticated and also a little more intelligent with our artificial intelligence because we now see how far. Like when Terminator was made, that felt like a foreign concept. Now, like I feel like we are really close to Terminator being like 100% real. Like when I see some of these robots they're building, I'm like, we are one gun away from being in
Yeah,
a
yeah.
Terminator
Let's not
movie.
make any like AI war robots because
Yeah,
we
like,
saw that already. It
yeah.
doesn't work out. That's not
we
a good
are
idea.
we're on that path though. You know what I mean? And that was '84, so wasn't even 40 years ago. We're on that path right now. So
You
yeah,
know a good oh, go ahead.
no, I just so I feel like what I defend about Ex Machina and then is I feel like we're evolving. Films are evolving. Like Megan is a really smart movie
Yeah.
because you talk about it drills down to that one area where it's a robot meant to be a protector of a child specifically and how that goes wrong. The male overinflated male ego of building a robot to serve him sounds
Mhm.
basic, but let's be honest, Patrick, that is the overinflated male ego of reality.
The reality is, in about 30 years, that is what most AI robots will do: is they will serve some guy somehow.
I
Like
we are
that is
we
a hundred
are
percent happening.
we are one Twitter crash away from Elon Musk creating his own Tesla robot that's a woman, and I'm
Oh
just
god,
saying, like we are like
yeah,
one
it's
we are
coming.
one snap of the fingers away from that. So I'm just saying, like again, defending X, but you're right in terms of like Megan being the next evolution of that. But I appreciate that, like because now we're not just talking about like the robots gone wrong. We're talking about specific robots going wrong, and
Yeah.
that's what kind of what Megan is. But yeah, artificial. I mean, another great example of that, a movie that I'm still not a huge fan of, but the concept of it is Minority Report, predicting crime, and there's
Right.
actually like algorithms out there right now that predict crimes and predict crime
Mhm.
waves and things like that, and that's terrifying to me. Like,
Yeah.
imagine being in a situation where you're condemned before you had a chance to commit the freaking crime.
I know, it's
Like,
fucking awful.
I was not a huge Minority Report fan, but the concept of Minority Report is real and terrifying.
You know, another movie that stands out that I actually really love, and I'm pretty sure I think you did too, was Her.
Oh
Joaquin
yeah,
Phoenix, Scarlett Johansson. I think it's a great movie, and it's a lot like, actually, it's kind of the Megan story told from a very different perspective. Obviously, taking out the horror aspect and just going like, what are we doing if we're going to like silo people into their little AI relationships? What is the consequence of that? What is the consequence for creating an AI that can fall in love and then decides like, well, I'm a complex being that can love, so I need to do other things. I can't just like, it became a relationship story. And I was like, I thought that one was like extra clever. And I believe it won the Oscar for best original screenplay, I think, that
I
year.
think it
It's
did.
a yeah, it's a really like clever movie along the lines of something like Megan. Will Megan get the same kind of awards love? Probably not. We already know that. But I think that the underlying themes of Megan are something that we can take with us into future AI movies to go like, now we need to be a little more focused. It's not enough to just do a Terminator, like a new take on a Terminator. Like you've got to, AI runs a lot of things in our lives. AI runs some people's toast. So it's a matter of finding that subject matter and focusing on that a little bit. And Megan does it to great effect.
Yeah, and Her is a great example of kind of that similar thing where Her is about a connection between a person and an artificial intelligence being. In this case, it's just a voice. It's almost like a Siri.
Yeah.
And it becomes an attachment, and it becomes a debilitating attachment because this guy played by Joaquin Phoenix, he loses the ability to connect with anybody else because he's so connected to this robotic, this artificial intelligence voice that's like saying all the right things. And it's like, having a girlfriend that you talk to on the phone, but you never see her. And that's kind of what her is, and it just disconnects him from the rest of the world. Um, and again, that's kind of what Megan does here with this little kid. Like, and they start to realize through this movie, like, you realize that like she's losing connection to you as her aunt because now her entire world revolves around Megan because that's what you set up Megan to be.
Yeah.
So like her is a version of that, and I would actually argue, you know, like I wouldn't say like the Terminator is not simplistic, so I don't want to make
No.
it sound like that, but the Terminator is like the first stage of evolution. One thing I would recommend is years later, and it's at this point it's an older show too, but they did the Terminator: The Sarah Connor Chronicles for 2 seasons
Right.
on Fox, and it's a really really well done show. And that show is the evolution of that, where the robot takes another form, where you get that protective robot. In that movie, it's played by Summer Glau, but it's the relationship expands beyond even what they did in Terminator 2 because it's a longer form television show, so there's more involved, more involved in time to create that character and kind of involve that character. But that's kind of what I talk about with like going from like Ex Machina is stage 1,
Yeah.
her is stage 2, Megan is stage 3, like kind of the same thing. Like Terminator was stage 1, Terminator 2
Mm-hmm.
was stage 3, and then now like Terminator Sarah Connor Chronicles was like I feel like that's what we keep evolving towards is movies that come up with like a genuinely well done concept of into artificial intelligence, and then it keeps escalating. And
Yeah.
I feel like I joke and say like I feel like we are like one inventor away from having a real Terminator where we like it, because in the back of your head, not to go like all philosophical there, Patrick, when you think about it in the back of your head, like wouldn't it be great if we didn't have to send our own soldiers over
Mm-hmm.
to fight wars and they wouldn't have
Mm-hmm.
to die for these for these terrible things? Great, let's send the robots.
Yeah.
What happens when the robots decide like, hey, why are
What
we
happens
taking
when there's
orders?
Russian robots?
Why are we taking orders? Why are they listening to us?
This North Korean robot sure is pushy.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Yeah, you're opening like a can of worms. So I'd be like, hey, whoa, whoa, whoa! Instead of doing the army robots, what if we did like an AI that solves solves political fucking strife around the world? Because
but
clearly, like some of our human counterparts can't do it too well.
but that's what we talk about with the like, and I'm not getting on like a preachy comment about artificial intelligence because I'm a technology geek. I love technology.
Yeah.
But like that again, when you talk about like the engineers, like I don't understand why is that a problem. It's like in theory, sending robots to fight our wars and fight our battles so we don't have to use that sounds amazing. It does. Like I've had so many family members in the military. I've known people in the military who have died. It's like I'm not making light of that. So when you
Hmm.
think about that, like robots would be a great solution. But then you don't think about the repercussion of like the continuation of that. And that's, like I said, and it's just like you talk about the cooking or like the robot cleaning my house. Like you don't think about the repercussions of like what happens one day if you're like, robot, make me dinner. And they're like, here is dinner. Oh, I'm allergic to peanuts. We don't care about your peanut allergy fucking dish. And you're like, oh my God.
No, help me!
We don't think about that, right?
I hate
Like,
onions, please.
like you're thinking about like you're just thinking about the ease of like cook all my meals. Okay, there's your standing order, and then you're like, oh, I can't eat that. You will eat this. And you like it.
You must eat all the meals. That's the rule.
Yeah.
Uh, I think what you point out there with the stage 1 through stage 4 of AI is that AI is teaching human writers to write more clever AI movies. Like now we're getting into a more varied and nuanced discussion with AI in the movie realm, as opposed to just basically making copies of either 2001: A Space Odyssey or Terminator, which seems to be how AI has been flip flopping for the past 40 years. Now we can sort of get into a definitely something that's a little more specific and interesting and nuanced.
And that's what Megan does. Megan is a little bit more specific,
Really
a little
well.
more nuanced, and really well done. Again, I do have minor complaints about the fact that it's PG-13. I feel like this version of an R-rated Megan, I would have loved. Because damn, seeing someone get their face blasted off with a power washer, I'm all for that. But still didn't ruin the movie. Still really enjoyed it. So our last category is always, Patrick, is it scary? So ultimately, at the end of the day, Megan, is it scary?
I mean, listen, again, we say this all the time. Damon and I are highly desensitized. So did it scare me? No. But is it creepy? Yes. Is there like I mentioned Uncanny Valley early on? Some people like absolutely makes their skin crawl. Like the idea of a doll of any sort freaks a lot of people out. I think that alone could make people go like, "Damn, this movie freaks me the hell out." Um, More than anything, I think Megan is fun and smart, and I think whether it scares me or not, it's not keeping me up at night. I'm not scared of any of the dolls in my house, but Damon, I do want to watch it again. And I think that's all that fucking matters.
Yeah, it's not scary in the traditional sense of a horror film, but it's creepy, and
Mm-hmm.
it's a very unnerving movie in moments. I think that's the best way I would describe it.
Yeah.
Unnerving in moments. And you know what reminded me of? I meant to mention this earlier. Did you ever see the remake of Child's Play that they did a few years?
Yes, I did.
Okay, that was one of the only times I have ever considered seriously one of the only times I've ever considered getting up and walking out of a movie theater before it was over because it was such a bad version of a movie. Megan, everything that they wanted to do with the Child's Play remake, where they made a robotic Chucky robot gone wrong. That's really what that film is. They don't do it with like a possessed serial killer in the body of a Chucky doll like the original Chucky. This was like a robot gone wrong, right? Like that's and in a way, kind of what Megan is. They're trying to make it like a doll
Yeah.
that connects with your child, becomes its friend, all those kind of things. Everything they do wrong in that movie, which made me literally want to walk out of the theater and just be like, fuck this movie, they get right in Megan. Like
Mm-hmm.
everything they tried badly to do in that film, they do right in Megan. They actually form that connection. You see why they're connected. There's a reason for them to be connected with the little girl just having lost her parents. And there's genuinely moments of heart in this movie. Like really your heart, like you mentioned the scene earlier where the little girl kind of breaks down in tears and Megan consoles her and says all the right things and helps her create memories of her parents because she's scared in 10 years she's not going to remember her mom. That hit me. I was like, oh
That was
Jesus.
good.
Like
It's a good moment.
as a guy who's lost his parents, now I lost them years later. I wasn't a kid, but like that hit me. I was like, damn, that's deep. Like that's
Mm-hmm.
really deep. Everything that they tried and failed miserably in that film, they executed brilliantly in this one.
Now, I didn't hate the Child's Play remake like you did. I thought it was okay. But I fully agreed while watching this. I go, this is everything the Child's Play remake wanted to be and couldn't do.
Yeah.
Because I think they were just a little too focused on like, let's just get to the killing. Whereas this movie goes, let's get to the theme. Let's get to the heart of why all this is taking place. And like I said, even at the end of the movie, Megan's true north is still there. She still is just her whole goal is to protect Katie to a fault. That's the problem. But it is ultimately about that and about like trying to sever the connections to inanimate things and keeping your human elements in place. So it's just an infinitely more clever movie than the Child's Play remake was, despite the fact that you hated it and I didn't hate it, but I recognize that yeah, Megan does it way better.
Megan does it right when other films in this genre do it wrong, and I
Mm-hmm.
think that's really the key.
Absolutely.
All right, folks, that's our officially our first show of 2023. Want to say thank you as always for tuning into the show. Make sure you check us out on all of your favorite podcast platforms: Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, and of course over on my website nerdcoremovement.com. And we are soon coming to YouTube. I know we've been promising that for a while. It is coming in a matter of days, I promise. So stay tuned. The YouTube version of the podcast is coming. Make sure if you have questions, comments, movies you'd like us to review. We got a lot of comments from the Best of episode on Twitter, so thank you for all the folks that reached out to us on Twitter, gave us suggestions of movies and talked about their favorite movies, so thank you so much for that. You can always hit us up on email as well. That's rotlivingdead@gmail.com. That's rot. livingdead@gmail.com. And you can also find us on Twitter. I am at Damon Martin, and you are?
At Director Patrick.
And do not forget to follow us on all your other favorite all your other favorite social media platforms. We are on Instagram, we're on Facebook, we're also on Twitter. Just search Rewind of the Living Dead or just Rewind of Living Dead on any of the social media platforms. You'll find us on there, and hit us up with those messages as well. We would gladly take your suggestions. Got a couple of them already leaning into the new year, so we're very excited to talk about that. Obviously, we got a big year ahead, tons of great horror releases. I feel like now that we're kind of out of the pandemic era, Patrick, and we're all going back to the theaters, I feel like this is going to be an even as big of a year as 2022 was for horror. I feel like 2023 might be even bigger because we've already got like 10 films in the first like 4 months that we're ready to review. So this is going to be a huge year.
I know. I'm already feeling like the slate's filling up. Like I'm having to figure out which movies we're gonna review and leave behind for no good reason other than the sheer abundance of them. It's looking to be another great horror year.
Yeah, so I cannot wait for all that. I want to say a big thank you as always for everyone that tunes in. We will see you next week for another edition of Rewind of the Living Dead. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you then.
Peace.